Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new revenge stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled, Who Owns the Curb? I lived across the street from a very bored stay-at-home mum whose excess idle time turned her into an insufferable busybody. Her husband backed out of the driveway and slammed into my roommate's car parked on the curb. He apologized, gave us his insurance info, and took care of it. He was never a problem, because he accepted responsibility for what he did. His wife, however, demanded that we never ever park any cars at the curb again, because we can't get out of our driveway otherwise. The street was very wide, she was just completely unable to accept that the accident was her husband's fault. Seems reasonable to expect your neighbors to be safe when they drive. One day, she came storming over, banging on the front door, cussing us out. We got her on our security camera saying, if you don't move that ducking car in the next 10 minutes, I am going to ducking total it with my truck. It'll be your fault, and you'll have to pay for the damage to my ducking vehicle. To this, I simply responded, I don't know whose car that is, but I didn't park it there. I have you on camera, so if you do anything to that car, I'll have to call the police and hand over this tape. She then threatened to sue me for invasion of privacy for recording her, and still insisted that we move the car, even though it wasn't our property. We just ignored her. We did keep the recording though. A few weeks later, I had a friend visit from out of town. He parked his car on the curb, and then started unloading some stuff from his trunk. She came storming out, screaming and cussing at him, I have told you repeatedly never park your ducking car on this curb. If you don't move it, I am going to total it, and you can ducking pay for a new goddamn car, as well as the damage you do to mine. He tried to calm her down, and asked if there was somewhere else he could park, and she replied, you can park it in hell, because that's where you'll be after I kill you. Was she charged with lack of self-awareness? Unfortunately for her, he had his dashcam running the whole time, and it captured everything. He called the police, and she was arrested for threatening to commit vandalism and for threatening violence. We used her arrest and our collection of security and dashcam footage to get a restraining order against her that actually prohibited her from entering her own home. Then we called the police every time we saw her because she was in violation of the order. She ended up having to live in a hotel room, and her husband came over, apologized to us, and asked if we would drop the restraining order so his wife could come home. I told him I would do it, but only if she wrote me, my wife, our roommates, and the friend of mine she threatened a one-page apology. I received no apology, and the house went on the market a week later. The next one is titled, Steal Money in My Name? Watch all the money you thought you had gained come back to me. One more thing before I get all into it, every story has a silver lining, and this is mine. It doesn't take away from the fact though, that it was caused by much worse circumstances that no one should have to go through, and anyone who's been through the same as I have can attest to it. If anyone out there right now is going through domestic violence or emotional abuse, I urge you to contact the authorities and am myself always available to chat as well if you need advice or such. Anyway, so all this started a couple months ago with an incident between my parents. It's important to note I still live with them, but have been working and providing for myself since graduating in the summer and am fully self-sufficient. My father has always been an abusive person, albeit one that did support his family at the time, but due to his lack of self-control and outbreaks the situation was more often tense than not. Especially between me and him as the power began to shift and I stopped relying on him. So yeah, a couple months ago in an incident between him and my mother he hit her, which started my mother's silent treatment of him for about 2 weeks, when he decided to get physical again, this time against me, which resulted in a bigger fight, and in the process my younger sister's shoulder getting hurt, mother breaking her nose, and me calling the cops. He was arrested that day and had a restraining order filed against him for 10 days. All temporary, as the police over here, in Switzerland, tends to avoid stepping in more than necessary, and did this for our protection while leaving us to make further decisions. An important thing to note is that my mother has always been a stay-at-home mum, especially since my sister is still underage and she doesn't have a formal education to make much money in this country. So for her, divorce was more something like a last resort, and she attempted to try and get family counseling, couples therapy set up, which didn't turn out so well, at which point we got her a lawyer and began the proceedings. I also studied law myself to an extent before going into my current field, so a lot of what happened here I was well equipped for, which did make things easier. This is where the money part starts. Our family has been pretty well off ever since I can remember, so my sister and I both have had somewhere in the ballpark of $150K each saved up for our schooling, first cars, etc. Half of this money was put into accounts in our name. While our parents could still access them, the money was legally ours. The other half was put into accounts in our grandparents' names in the US for logistical reasons. The day of the first court hearings, I was in the progress of transferring said account fully into my name, as I was expecting something like what did end up happening to happen. Later, when the transfer succeeded, I found out almost all the money up to a fairly round number was transferred to my father's locked pension plan. This was a surprise to me, as to my knowledge until then only my mother was supposed to have direct access to it, while my father would have had to have the bank card, which I knew was with us. So after some checking, I found out my mother wasn't fully aware of when she had signed forms that gave him access, but more on that later. As I was now down on a big chunk of money, part of it was my literal income I had been saving, it was time to get my own lawyer. In addition to this transfer, back when we were building our house, my father took a loan from my account, which was understood to be a mutual agreement and him paying me back at a given time. Knowing a little about how his lawyer operated, the amount of offenses he potentially had to his name, and the fact that my mother and sister were now open to pressing charges against him if it came to it, I had a feeling that this would end up in an out-of-court agreement. I set up a meeting with my lawyer, and collected as much evidence as possible regarding the transactions and ownership of the account. While my father did have the legal papers to manage my account, in Switzerland that means any action is meant to be taken in my best interest. His pension plan doesn't concern me, so any reasonable judge would rule in my favor. Additionally, my mother's lawyer became aware of the situation, as she legally represented my sister as well, who lost a similar amount of money due to the same thing. Before I even met my lawyer, him and my mother's lawyer discussed the situation and managed to create a good picture of it. So finally, the first meeting. I discussed the situation with my lawyer. As my father assaulted me, I had the options to press charges, as well as request for damages made and possibly sue him for the money, but to this day it's hard for me to say if I'd have managed to get all of it back with that method, as courts would have trouble recognizing his debt to me from the house loan, and not to mention the insane costs involved with starting a legal case against someone in your own family. Knowing my father, I also knew that he wouldn't shy from spending thousands of dollars to protect himself in court with better lawyers, which was exactly why my lawyer figured it'd be better to come to a settlement, as I certainly had more I could use against my father than vice versa. With the only difference being that this way I might get a lot more out of it than the money he only just took recently. At this point, I'd like to note that my grandparents had officially cut myself, my mother and my sister out because they didn't agree with the decision for us to stay away from my father. They insisted on the need for family therapy, whereas we had already decided there was no point, and my mother was divorcing him while I decided to get a lawyer and fight for myself. My father also managed to allegate that I had hit him on the day of the incident, which was another reason for me to make sure that no one could claim I accepted that statement for the obvious lie it was. Since my grandparents cut me out, I could say goodbye to that half of the money already. No way to sue for it, nor was I legally entitled to it, so the bank couldn't do much. This is where it gets interesting, though. My lawyer created a whole list of things we could use against my father, ranging from the recent incident to cases from the past that I had written up when this all started, as well as using statements from my old teachers and my therapist to create the skeleton for a case that would certainly get expensive. The whole point of this was to have a solid foundation on which we could then approach my father's attorney and suggest a settlement for the money taken out of my account recently, as well as him returning the loan for the house. He was hesitant at first, and even suggested to my mother that she and him would pay off a small part of it over time as a compromise, but that clearly wasn't an option for me. After hearing this, I contacted my lawyer once again and had him double down on our very specific demands, that we wanted to come to an agreement for $50,000, in exchange I would drop the charges and leave him alone. This also meant in return he would have to let go of the claims that I hit him, essentially closing the case for both parties. There was also a deadline for me to continue with the case, leaving him 3 more days to consider it. Luckily, the whole thing seemed to be a game of chicken, with him waiting until the night before deadline to finally agree to our request. His lawyer contacted us, and eventually wrote an email, saying that they agreed with the requests and would be glad to sign a contract on the matter. Making it up to my lawyer now to write up the contract and end the whole deal. A funny part about this whole exchange was my father's statements that were part of the email to us, claiming that they had just as much of a case against me, and could press charges if they so pleased, listing a bunch of things I had allegedly done that would warrant a countersuit. In the end, seeing that they agreed to pay me all that money, I'm quite sure those statements were just to show that they weren't afraid more than anything else, really. Since if they truly believed the allegations, they would have just proceeded with the case. Now a couple days later I received the transaction for all the money that we agreed on, and the case is officially over for me. The irony of it all is, my grandparents cut me out and probably encouraged my father to do what he did regarding the last money I had left to my name. In the end, all the money that was in the US was the money my father used to pay me back, since the pension plan he paid the money into was locked, and he had no other quick financial means to reach the settlement. So a big chunk of money went down the drain on lawyer, and most of the money saved for me ended up with me. The part that landed in the pension plan even came with its own benefits. As my parents are still married, my mother gets 50% of it in the divorce. All of this did come at a cost, though, which is why the first thing I said in this post is the most important to me. My mental health has suffered a lot from all this, and I've never been so burnt out. Not only that, I need more psychiatric attention than ever, and my relationship with my father's side of the family is forever ruined. So while that last part was necessary, they were toxic, manipulative and abusive, and picking his side after all the incidents they knew about, and also knowing that there were more they didn't know about. The mental toll these things take on a person can affect your entire life. Which is why I once again want to stress that if anyone out there is going through anything remotely similar, to please reach out to people you can trust, contact the authorities or something like that. You don't need to be stuck in that situation for as long as I was, which is a whole another story. The next one is titled, A Criminal and a Coincidence. My first car was a 1984 Jeep CJ7, a pretty sweet ride for a dirt poor teenager in the 90s. I was working midnights at a gas station and loaned it to my brother who was taking a date to a party. I got a call around 1 AM from my brother who told me he left the keys in the Jeep and it was stolen. If you love something, let it go, and if it loves you too, it will return. I was still on the phone with my brother when the thieves pulled my Jeep into my gas station to fill up on gas. As luck would have it, the gas gauge on my Jeep was broken and always read empty, and I worked at the only 24-hour gas stations in the area. I pressed the silent alarm and proceeded to fill up my Jeep. It was a full-serve station. When the thieves were out of the Jeep, I saw an opportunity to slip the key out of this ignition and into my pocket. They paid for the gas, and argued among each other who had the keys last. The delay was enough for the police to arrive. "Ooh, you in trouble now?" I had to explain the story to the officer half a dozen times before he understood. The thieves had this stunned look of disbelief on their faces I'll never forget. The cops were belly laughing, telling the story to dispatch, all the while the thieves sat in cuffs in the back of the squad car. The last one is titled, Best Man Brings Mistress to My Wedding. We make him leave the state. I met Justin while working campus security at a local community college here in Iowa. My first day of work was his last day of work when we had a domestic call in the parking lot where a student had punched his girlfriend. The police were called and they took it from there. Justin failed to write his report and was let go. In the 12 hours of working with him I found him personable, friendly and funny. We both liked off-roading, guns, hunting and other hobbies, so we became friends. Over the years of being friends I noticed while he would give the shirt of his back to help another he liked to embellish or just straight make up stories. My soon-to-be wife and I soon became close family friends with Justin and his wife Larissa. Larissa was sweet, kind-hearted, soft-spoken, successful and an amazing cook. After a few years, Justin starts to take a turn for the worse and begins lying about mundane things like things as simple as what he had for lunch, or how he saw such and such a band when he was deployed. The issue with his fantastic Navy experience is he could never keep his job title straight. He would say he was a navigator, then he would say he was SWIC, then something different. He would claim PTSD caused his lies and we would just move on. Over time, my soon-to-be wife and Larissa became best friends and she almost became part of our family in a way, as well as Justin. We noticed Justin was spending a lot of time with a member of our local Jeep Club's daughter. We will name her Billy, Tony being her father. The Jeep Club was a huge part of our lives and we would do camping trips, road trips, off-road trail rides and even obstacle courses. Billy was 17 and Justin was in his late 30s. They were constantly together, leaving Larissa to hang out with us. Justin went so far as to buy Billy her prom dress and was just very uncomfortably attached to Billy. Tony calls us asking if we know where Billy is, as he had not seen her since that morning and it was getting to be dinner time. We told him she was with Justin and they had gone fishing. Tony said he had stopped by the house and saw Justin's Jeep parked in the driveway, but no one answered. He pinged his daughter's cell phone and it showed it was at Larissa and Justin's house. Larissa went home and literally caught them in just underwear. Justin somehow explained it away and all was well. Mary and I quickly put Justin on our B list, but he was still set to be my best man and Larissa a bridesmaid for our upcoming wedding. As the wedding comes closer, Justin keeps going down a spiral and Larissa keeps forgiving and taking his word for it. A few days before the wedding, Larissa tells us that she can't come to the wedding because she has to go pick up Justin's 2 kids from a prior marriage in Georgia. Mary was bummed but had a friend take her place so our wedding party would be even. It's wedding day and we are setting up and are very busy as we did the catering ourselves and the planning and everything. Justin calls me and asks if he can bring a +1 and I say sure without really thinking about it. People start to arrive and everything is running smoothly until Justin shows up with his +1. We will call her Danny. Justin introduced her as a friend he met at work, but Mary and I know better. Trying to see if Danny knows she's being played, we ask where Larissa is. He says she's picking up his kids and will be back tomorrow. The only time Danny batted an eye was when he called her a friend from work. We move on and don't dive into it as we still have a lot to do. The wedding ceremony goes off without a hitch and we start the reception. It's open bar and good music. The usual wedding things, the speeches, food, drink, games and tossing of flowers and undergarments. As the night goes on, Justin and Danny are huddled in the corner. However, we need Justin for his speech. We drag him out onto the dance floor and he tells his speech. Meanwhile, Mary is talking to Danny, asking her how they met, who they were to each other and telling her about Larissa. Danny is shocked and quite upset. We give her a stiff drink and the night goes on. Dancing and drinking is all that's left and the pictures start flashing. We take pictures of everyone including Justin and Larissa and including some kissing photos. The whole night we are sending these to Larissa via Snapchat. Eventually my aunt, mother and a few others confront me because they heard Danny is a mistress. We explain it's not our business but we are handling it. This not being good enough, the family confronts Justin and Danny and tell them to leave. As soon as they leave, I call Larissa and tell her everything. The call: "Hey Larissa, it's Chris, we need to talk when you get back, we have some bad news and evidence this time." She asked if it's marriage ending or something else. I say marriage ending. The next day my Snapchat had a ton of screenshot notifications, all from Larissa, and Larissa calls saying she will be at our house in an hour. The plot and revenge. Larissa shows up in tears and shaking with anger. We try to calm her, but this is her moment to melt down. She tells us how he hasn't touched her in months, how they found out she can't have kids and since then he's been super distant. How he gets messages at odd times and won't check them when she's around. How she caught Billy and him but was too blind to see it. On and on she went about how he keeps getting fired from jobs. He's spending all her money on Jeep parts and cash withdrawals from ATMs. She runs out of fuel eventually and we ask what she wants to do. We veto her first answer for legal reasons. But we plot our revenge. We will take everything from him, starting with kicking him out with only items he paid for with his money. We go to Larissa's house and change the locks. We gather up Justin's clothes and a few other things he paid for. I grab his PS4 and Larissa says no, she paid for that. We dump it all on the curb. The next thing is the Jeep he loves so dear. The Jeep being fully in Larissa's name. Paid for by her, the parts added also paid for by her. We drive to the bar where he works and using the extra key we take the Jeep and stash it at a Jeep Club member's house, having filled him in entirely with what's going on. The struggle. Justin apparently was not going down without a fight. Larissa had stayed the night at our house and the next morning she calls us telling us Justin had broken into her house and taken all the electronics, some of the furniture and even pictures off the wall, as well as cut up the mattress and broke some pictures. He also took the remaining keys, including one to her Jeep. Larissa tells us she called the police but they won't do anything. I call my friend who's an officer and see if he could help. He's the same officer I asked about when we found out Justin was sleeping with Billy. At that time he said she's 17, an adult in Iowa, nothing he could do. This time he said they are married and both dwelling and have legal right to the home. Unless he does something threatening or illegal, it's a civil matter. It doesn't take long for Justin to cross that line though. Larissa calls us and tells us that Justin just tried to steal her Jeep from work, but she had bought the club and locked it to her wheel. The Jeep ended up in traffic with the door wide open and Justin was arrested for it. Larissa finally got what she needed to get a restraining order and a breath of air as we moved ahead. Now we had taken his car and his house, but he was still in town causing trouble for anyone he thought took part in this. The only thing he had left was his job, which we were sure he would lose on his own, but we needed to give it a shove. We had found his discharge papers from the Navy. Turns out he was a navigator and nothing more. It also showed he was dishonorably discharged. We make contact with Danny and she tells her side of the story and tells us she wants to get revenge as well. Larissa, who had full access to the iCloud and had seen all the women Justin had messed with, reached out to all of them. 2 more were willing to join for the final move. The final move is to take his discharge papers to the bar, which prided itself on hiring veterans and supporting veterans, with all the women he had messed with and lied to, and cause a scene. This was partially ruined when the owner walks out and meets us all in the parking lot. She's not having it at her bar. We all tell her what he has done to us and that he lied when he applied to work there, and handed her his papers. She reads them and hands them back. She says to stay there, that Justin will be out shortly and will need a ride. We wait. We wait and out Lopez Justin, red-faced and clearly upset. He starts yelling if we are happy, that we have taken everything from him, that he's going to sue and end up owning Larissa's house. Larissa out of the blue says no, we haven't taken everything yet, but we will if you don't leave. He laughs and asks, oh yeah? You took my house, my car and my job. What's left? Larissa says, your kids. Now that you have nothing, you had better move back home, because if you don't, we will send everything to your ex and she will take you back to court, and without me to support you, you have absolutely nothing. We leave and find out he called his mum, who paid for a one-way ticket back to Texas. We still gave the information to his ex but don't know what came of it. This is how we made a full-grown man call his mommy to save him. Thanks for listening.